Are you willing to name the governments that are doing the best, even in developing nations, to benefit their citizens and prepare them for climate change, and the corporations that might be helping, and then the corporations and governments that are right now have the farthest to go? Is there anything you want to discuss?
I have some examples from the developing world because that is what I have been studying most. In Brazil, in Porto Alegre, in Curitiba, in Ilo, Peru, in Manizales, and this is without accent. This is the first time I say something without accent. So in all this, I mean, with my accent. In all those places, local authorities, together with the grassroots, with the communities, and with academic sectors, have developed programs to improve the living conditions of those populations, and in the case of Manizales, to move them away from risk-prone areas. By doing so, they have been able to increase the resilience, the capacity of those populations to deal with floods and with lots of climate-related risks. In the case of Curitiba and Porto Alegre, they have been able to develop actions to curb carbon emissions, like those actions. And I always like to use those examples because those show that we people can contribute to this. Those actions include the promotion of public transportation, the use of bikes, people reduce their trips, their travel, their commuting, and those examples show that it is possible, it is in our reach to do something to curb carbon emissions. Those are good examples. Right. I prefer to not talk about my
Okay, you're not going to. Okay, then I have one last.
No, we can talk, but not now.
I have one last question for you. Kevin, you want to say something?
Well, I'm more inclined to name names.
Good for you. That's what we like to hear.
Well, Patty talked about building resilience and adaptation issues, and of course the other part of it is to prevent the problem from happening, and so that relates very much to the Kyoto Protocol. Right. And so a number of countries have signed, many countries, 154 countries have signed the Kyoto Protocol. I come from New Zealand, and New Zealand takes it very seriously. It turns out New Zealand is unique among nations in that they have more methane emissions than carbon dioxide emissions from something like 50 million sheep. And there's a lot of interesting research going on in that regard. But across the Tasman Sea was Australia, who has now just recently signed the Kyoto Protocol, but had not. And when I was down in New Zealand, well, I've been down there a couple of times, and I've talked with the government there, and they were planning on introducing a carbon tax to deal with this issue. But a carbon tax effectively then penalizes the New Zealand farmer relative to the Australian farmer. And the fact that the Australians were not participating in this and in doing something comparable caused major problems. And so it highlights the fact that it's an international problem, a global problem, and right now the Europeans, I think, are leading in terms of trying to address the problem, although countries like New Zealand and Japan are also taking this very seriously and are trying to meet their Kyoto obligations. But the US is not. And one way in which you can view the US government's position on this is that they are trying to gain a business advantage, and many countries around the world have that perception, and it may well be correct.